Good morning, everybody. I am Lillian Thorpe, the director of Nancy Margolis Gallery. Thank you all so much for joining today's Artist Talk in conjunction with our two-person exhibition, Horizons. Our featured artists are Charity Baker of New York City, who received her MFA at the New York Studio School, and Brian Rego of Charleston, South Carolina, who received his MFA at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. A college professor once told me that all landscapes are self-portraits. I became fascinated by this idea that any depiction of a natural scene can reveal significant truths about the maker. When figures are introduced, the relationship between nature and the artist's psyche becomes even more profound. With this in mind, I curated Horizons, celebrating two artists who excel at creating portraits of nature. Painter Gail Spaien of South Portland, Maine, is going to moderate today's conversation. A longtime professor of painting and graduate studio at the Maine College of Art and Design, her work is held in public and private collections worldwide. NMG will present Spain's second solo exhibition with the gallery this November. After the discussion, there will be an opportunity to ask the artists questions or make comments. Feel free at any point during the discussion to type a question into the chat box and I will read it aloud at the end. You can also click on the raise hand icon and I will call on you during the Q&A period. I am now briefly going to show the 10 paintings featured in Horizons before passing it over to Gail. Okay, it is my pleasure to hand it over to Gail Spaien.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I just have to acknowledge the bird sounds that have accompanied the slides. Charity is in Sweden, right? And
Yes.
so we have birds from Sweden joining us today. So Lillian, thank you. And it's been really fun looking at Brian and Charity's work and the thoughtful pairing of these works. So you all know I'm going to start with a few questions for Charity and Brian, and then I'll ask them each specific questions related to their work. And then maybe if there's time, we'll go back to a couple of final questions that they can both answer. So lots to talk about. I'm going to start with the first question, which is about the title of the show, Horizons. A horizon line can function in many ways in a painting. It can be a formal compositional device, a line that splits the picture plane. It can also be a conceptual choice, one that tells us something about the ideas in the painting. And it can be both. So Brian and Charity, can you each talk about how the horizon line functions in your work? Your paintings certainly call to one another through this theme. And I guess I'll start with Brian. Brian, why don't you start and then organically you can go back and forth.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to thank everybody for being here. And I see a lot of faces that I recognize, and that means a great deal. Thank you, Lillian, for hosting this, and for Gail for moderating the talk. I'm really excited to be in a show. And I think there's a lot of wonderful things to talk about today. I would say that for me, like, obviously there is a formal element to the horizon line, just in the sense that, you know, horizontal is like stable and certainly provides a type of infrastructure for the vertical movements in a piece. So for me, that becomes a really exciting moment when I can sort of agitate that by tilting the horizon line into like kind of moving it into a diagonal where all the vertical axes also move into diagonals. And then it sort of, it animates the space. It causes it to behave in a way that is not so stable. And then I have to work to bring stability into that kind of that movement and the energy that it creates. For me, that's important because oftentimes the narratives that end up sort of emerging in the work, they have the same sort of feeling about them for me, like in a sense where what is being portrayed and then what is sort of being implied can be two different things. And so, you know, both on a formal level and on a sort of conceptual level, the horizon line plays a key role in supporting those two aspects of the work.
So thank you, everybody. And I'm glad to be able to join remotely. And Brian, I love what you just said. I mean, I definitely use the horizon line as part of the surface geometry of the painting and the cubic space, you know, thinking about space. I would say that my biggest concerns in the painting are light and color. And so, and also just, you know, both in these paintings that are curated for this show, they're obviously like landscape based with figures. So I like to use the horizon line very much with the figurative aspect of the work to describe a narrative, I would say. I remember, you know, the first time I really started doing this, playing with the idea of, I did this one painting once, which I was in a place where the sky was spectacular. And I've made this big painting that was of the sky, like with some very dramatic thing that happened in the sky, just with the clouds and the light. And then something very dramatic was happening in my personal life. And I was painting some figures into the painting sort of randomly, but as a thumbprint. And I, you know, I kept them below the horizon line. I remember doing that for the first time really specifically, embedding them in the ground because I didn't, and it created like an equal amount of drama and, you know, and so there's so many formal considerations, but there's a lot of, you know, like for me, painting is very thrilling. So like color is very thrilling. So, and then the two narratives, human and nature, combining them in a way that, you know, can really express, like have the human presence, express the idea that whatever I experience in nature, very much as dramatic and beautiful as it is, mimics my experiences as a human. So I try to just, that horizon line though is where I play with nature and human in the piece.
Brian, do you want to say any more?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Charity, that was really great. And I also was thinking about too, you know, just helping to contextualize the viewer with like an angle of vision, you know, so it kind of gives them an entry point to the piece. And I think about orientation, disorientation, you know, so I start all of my paintings on location. And a lot of times, you know, anybody who paints on location knows that, you know, you encounter unfavorable conditions probably more often than you do favorable conditions, right? So you have to get like very resourceful. And so a lot of times I have my back to the subject. And so I have to, turn around. And when I do, like the angle of my head like changes, right? So that tilts everything. And so I've really worked to sort of be consistent with that angle of vision. And it's fun. It's become something that is kind of it allows me to sort of initiate a different type of dialogue in the painting while I'm making it. And so my hope is that it also initiates is the same for the viewer.
So I'm wondering about the horizon line. Does it also indicate anything about time, internal time or external time? In both of your works, I read the work as a picture that has a time of day or a weather pattern or something's happening in real time, but there's also a psychological time, one that's maybe not linear. And I wonder, does the horizon line relate to time in any way for either one of you?
I'm glad you mentioned time, because actually I'm going to amend what I said. I think light and time are my two biggest concerns in a painting. And Brian and I were talking about this the other day. So time, I think it's one of the most valuable commodities that we have, especially in a painting. And it expands from before you pick up the brush to, until you decide the painting's finished. It plays such a huge role in my work, playing with time, fast paintings like sunset paintings, slow paintings like studio paintings. And, I guess if you want to ask about how the horizon line is involved in time, in a studio painting, or even in a plein air painting, which I do both of, I don't know, Brian, how you are, but I definitely come out with a different painting than the one I start. It always changes, and the horizon line is always the thing that changes most dramatically, I would say. I don't know if that happens with you. And then also lack of a horizon line is something I play with too, which like spring has. There's no horizon line in spring. Yeah, anyway, I could go on about time, but I'm gonna let Brian respond.
Oh, that's great. I love that, Charity. Time is interesting, so I would say that like for me, I relate to my paintings, or my paintings are symbols in a sense. Like, so everything in the painting is symbolic and represents something beyond itself, right? So the horizon line is symbolic of time, of endless time, of potential time, of time that it has not yet been reached, but somehow is present, right? And so there's this and it's approachable in theory, and it's accessible in theory, but it just hasn't happened yet. And so I guess in some sense it does sort of represent the future, but it also represents just the unknown, right? And so the unknown is sort of like veiled and unveiled in time, right? And so there's that sense of it, of course. And then there's the actual event of the painting, like what is happening. The event of the painting portrays a time, a specific time. So it's sort of like, it's like time in parentheses, and time in parentheses within endless time or potential time. I guess in a sense, like if it's endless time, then there's really no time, right? I guess in that way. And I do think about those things quite often, which is kind of, it's like, man, where does that end, but for me, yeah, there's that aspect. And then of course, just the time that's put into making it. And that's strange too, because it's not straightforward, right? So like what Charity was saying, the painting changes so dramatically that it's almost comical to think that one would have a sense of what the painting would be at the start. Almost delusional in a sense, but we have to sort of entertain that delusion so we can arrive at something that is more real, that is more, weighed down by experience. And so there's that whole process of time in that as well, which I find to be quite interesting, because it's sometimes it's like, a couple of days, sometimes it's a few months or a couple of years even. Sometimes I think a painting is done, and then I look at it again and I start painting on it again. It drives people crazy. What can you do?
So the object is literally an object of time also, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to, that was very beautiful. I want to switch the conversation a little to drama. Drama and orchestration. So I so enjoyed looking at your paintings, both of you, and feel like there's a theatrical, dramatic, directorial component to the work. It's like you're orchestrating the figure interacting with a landscape, like a director orchestrating an action in a play. In both your works, it feels to me there's drama going on. So do you think of yourselves as directing a theatrical event? Are these dreams or hallucinations? Are they private stories or fiction? Who are these characters? And are your figures characters of your imagination or reality? I'd love to hear from you both about drama and orchestration, as it may or may not apply to the work.
When I was a little boy, I had an infatuation, and really just probably my first real connection to something that I experienced as a little boy consistently, beyond like cartoons and stuff like that, were these stories that were being told by this illustrator, Bill Watterson, who does Calvin Hobbes, or by Berkeley Breathed, who did like Bloom County and Outland. I became so enthralled in these stories and identifying with these characters. It was really my first sort of initiation into comedy, drama, sarcasm, wit, politics, philosophy, and existentialist thought. Like Bill Watterson gets into all that stuff. It's hilarious. But I got the sense of, as these characters come into life, and I got the sense of the intention and the purpose, the love and the care that was poured into the orchestration of these characters, and the way that as a reader, as a viewer, I was able to view or survey their life. And surely as the illustrator spent more time developing the characters, I, as a reader, I was able to see the characters evolve and change, even visually. Even though Calvin really never aged, the way that he was drawn began to change, and the characters at Berkeley Breathed from Bloom County, they would change. Opus took many different iterations, and so it was interesting to sort of to be a part of that in a way, and I felt very much a part of that, especially as a boy. And so I think that stuck with me. Before I even took on painting, I really wanted to be an animator. I loved seeing something come to life. The idea of that enthralled me. And so I would say that painting, in a way, allows me to do that, to bring something to life. in my case, Gail, I could say just yes, like to everything like you just asked. It's yes, it is personal, it is fiction, it's all that stuff, but it's all of it sort of mixed into this sort of form that has life in it, and is very much reflective of my life experience, and of my sensibilities, and who I am as a person, and of those others who have come into contact with in my life and or share my life with, and again, since my paintings, they function as these symbolic forms in a way, right, for me. And so that even the figures and who they represent and what they represent can alter drastically. A figure can represent an event or an emotion or a memory. And so I guess I would say that's, in terms of orchestration, I would say that the narrative, the orchestration of the narrative is probably one thing that takes the most time, because I really can't separate the content or like the idea from the form, right? So like one informs the other. It's just sort of like, it's like the breathing. It's like the inhale, exhale, right? Like you need both to get the life. And so if I don't understand the narrative, then I really don't understand the function or the purpose of the composition. And so the painting only advance as one begins to inform the other.
Charity, what about you? Are you, because in painting history, certainly there's a very big camp of people that would hate this question.
I guess so. Well, I can answer it. That was beautiful, Brian. I wouldn't just say that I share a lot of the same thoughts that you just expressed. And I'll just add to what Brian said in a way, because I so relate to what he just said. Yeah, you're right, Gail. This is a question that some people might hate, but I don't, because at first when I saw, when I first heard the question, it is a little scary to admit that your work has drama in it, especially figurative work, because maybe that's, I don't know, not very popular. But I'll just say that I've always been a bit of a thrill seeker. And that's, I would describe myself that way. And I do push myself I cause drama in my life, I guess, because of this, but in a good way. I'm very curious, and I just remember the very first time I took a drawing class, the feeling I had when I was drawing from life. This they said draw something, so I just drew like this seeds, file cabinets and chairs. It was in high school, like my senior year in high school, and like the minute my pencil was going down the page, like the first line I was making, I just never forget it, because I was like, I just felt like I had just, went through a portal into a new space that was like thrilling to me, and I just wanted to be there at all times after that. And every time I go to my easel, every time I've gone through the hassle of bringing paint down to some location and gotten everything out. And the minute I put my brush onto the canvas, I feel exhilarated. I love paint, and I love colors so much. My colors tend to be saturated, as you've said. Something I'm working on, like playing around with, but I like to paint really big because I like the drama for myself that I feel when I'm painting. And I guess it comes across in the work. I come from a dramatic, well, my mother is an actress, and we did a lot of dance when I was younger, like ballet and all kinds of dance. If I could do my life over again, I maybe would be a ballerina, but I'm pretty happy how it's going. But, you know, I think there's an element of, I mean, my oldest memories are watching my mom singing in nightclubs and, you know, singing love songs to people that I didn't know, you know, and thinking, wow, you know, this is not, you know, this is, there's a couple worlds you can have. And so I think that it's just innate in me, and everything that has to do with painting, and everything that has to do with what I paint, absolutely, as I said before, is woven into my experiences just on this planet. And nature is a big factor in what I find awesome. During the pandemic, I went down to the Hudson River every night in the summer that first year, and every single night the sky was, I mean, I couldn't believe what I was seeing every night, and I was painting it. How different it was every single night was like, and I think Brian just explained it, like the figures or some of the things in my painting, they might just be an emotion. It's not literal all the time, you know, that it's a girl looking for a boy or whatever it might seem like, but it's the interweaving of the subject, the color, the paint, the size, the scale, all of it is like, it's a show for myself. And, you know, that's one reason why I do, you know, scale is a big part of my work. I'm going to be painting a lot of very small paintings here in Sweden because of travel, but when I'm home, I like to make really big paintings. And I love going back and forth between the different sizes, and all of that is a drama that I experience. And I think that when you're in front of one of my paintings, you feel it too, hopefully.
That was beautiful. And so I'm going to ask you a question about, you know, specifically to your work. So the figures in some of your paintings seem to have permeable edges, and like in your painting Spring, and the skin seems transparent. You also crop your images in unexpected ways and your figures in unexpected ways, as in the painting Morning People. You give us fragments or croppings of a narrative rather than a whole story. So in the catalog, it says that you're captivated by an idealized view of humanity. And so I'm wondering, do those painting decisions help you make your ideas about idealized views of humanity visible?
It's funny because you say cropping, but I see it as stretching out to the edges. I see it the opposite. Instead of cropping, I see that I'm pushing what I'm looking at to really embrace and hug all the sides of the canvas in a way that's exhilarating to me. And so I think about the edges and the corners of my canvas more than anything. So it's funny that I've had that comment before where people think, you know, say the word crop, but if anything, I'm reaching out to the corner. Like, I think it's this constant conversation I'm having with the fact that I'm saying this is a painting. I love that idea that a painting can draw you into deep space, can bring you to high emotion, and can also say, this is a painting also. This is a flat surface with geometrical, you know, dynamism and qualities, and then there's color. So I love the materiality of paintings, as well as all of the, you know, the other deeper pictorial language that transcends into like the human experience. But the translucency of the skin, again, it's like this, when I paint, it's just like so basically it's like, I think, who was it that said this, like the very first mark is a mistake, and then the rest of them are like more mistakes and more mistakes. And then So I feel like my experience painting is like, I forget even how this one started, but there was an idea of, I was trying to like paint a series of paintings that had to do with skinny dipping and at night and night landscapes, because I was doing a lot of night landscapes. And this is, I was thinking, what would it look like to have a shadow of a person over another person that's in the water? And I love the idea of like juxtaposing them like, geometrically, like a perpendicular to each other. So I was like, I'm going to have one body cross through the other, but one's a shadow. That's what this is supposed to be. And then, it's just a matter of that mistake comment. It's like I put paint on, and then the minute I put paint on, I can decide what to do with that mark and how that responds to the color next to it. And in this case, I think that maybe there was blue underneath and I put this pink on, and it was just like, I'm a open-minded person. So it's like, I'm not going to force a body onto that blue color if I'm liking something else I see, and then that might take me somewhere else. So this painting, like, it came about. I don't remember how it started, but the ideas like came about as the paint was being applied, and it's like all these things happening at once. So I'm very sensitive to what's happening in the moment when I'm painting.
All right, so Brian, I'm gonna lead with the awful strangeness.
Oh, gosh.
In the catalog and the painting, The Discarded Glove. In the catalog, you say you get to document your life and the awful strangeness of being human. Can you say more about that? And what is the awful strangeness, and how is that playing out in this painting?
Yes. So when I use the word awful, I don't mean it in like a negative connotation. I mean it to suggest something that is full of awe, or that compels one to feel that way, or to be that way, to be in that state. And it's really the strangeness, it's the strangeness that I find in the day-to-day aspects of living and the people that I know very well. And I think it comes down to just the weight, the feeling of accountability and responsibility for really seeing one another. Seeing one another in a way that validates the instinctive or intuitive awareness of one another's value, inherent value. And the way that it plays out in day-to-day life is comical, right? And dramatic. Why I think Shakespeare resonates with so many people. But it's that day-to-day living where that for me is encountered, being just sort of in the mix of it all.
So it's like
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's bittersweet. Is it a bittersweet?
Oh, sure. Yeah, there's always pain. There's always pain, and there's beauty, and the two aren't necessarily separate from one another. So Discarded Glove is it's about letting go and being left behind, and how those aren't necessarily negative things, but they certainly are painful.
I have to say, for me, in this painting, the blue, the saturated, the little sort of light blue that's coming out of her hair says it all for me.
What did you say?
It's fantastic. I love this painting. So will you talk a little bit about color? We have a few minutes. We have a few minutes and then I think Lillian will open it for questions, but will you talk a little bit about color and maybe the accumulation of paint?
So, so observational color is important to me. I think just because I feel an inherent connection to it. It's earthy. I love earth colors. Don't know why, but I do. They're subtle, they're sublime. And there are moments when I'm completely caught off guard by the power in view. It's very surprising and unsettling at times. You know, it's it's a type of, you know, I love classical music, right? Because you sort of are lured into this lull, and then you're hit with something, and it's like you're almost pushed back, right? Or it's like you wake up, and I feel like that happens when I'm working from life and I'm working with that type of observational color. And so I like being sort of, you know, like kind of lulled into something and then being hit by something, right? Like sleep and coffee, right? Or something like that. And I guess I connect to other painters who have done incredible things with very little. They've made much out of very little. I think of someone like, you know, Piero, or like Titian, you know, Perot, Brandy. And I you know, I love, I've always loved like the palette, like Lucian Freud. I've always connected to that kind of palette. Or like Dickinson or Kossoff, or like Gwen John, you know. There's this sort of resonance that I feel, like a kinship that I feel within that type of color structure. I've always wanted to be a painter that could use these like super bright, like powerful, expressive colors. I love Bonnard. I just like, I want to be able to use color like that. But I'm sort of, when I try that, I end up using earth color anyway. It's like one of those things, you know. I'm always like in the tertiary somehow. But I love the quiet density that type of color can offer. It's a space that is quiet and full of sound, you know, all at once, and I really like that. The physicality of my paint, the buildup of it, I'm definitely an additive painter. I love to accumulate. And for me, it's a type of, like I've always been attracted to the power of gesture and movement, of form, and the economy of when I look at like a gesture made by Goya or like Rembrandt or like Velázquez, and it just hit it, you know. There's so much power in that. There's so much revelation in that, right? It's that, I think, sort of coupled with the physicality of an actual body that I'm building, that I'm constructing on the surface of the painting. It's the sort of, it's the physicality of the paint is an actual physical record of the movement, of the expression of the paint itself. And that's that's just an expression of my temperament, and I'm just built that way.
I think now is a good point to pivot, and I think we can open it up to questions from the audience. First of all, I want to thank you, Gail, for your amazing questions. I think you unearthed such rich dialogue, and Charity and Brian, your answers were so insightful and passionate, so thank you. So I have one question. It's specifically for Charity. It's from Suzanne, and she asks, Morning People has almost a Gauguin-like feeling to it, while I see more of a Paul Klee type of aesthetic in Spring. Who do you think were or are artists who influenced your work the most?
Oh, let's see. Well, I would say more Gauguin than Paul Klee. But yeah, I think that I started off as an artist liking, I would say almost first German Expressionism and Post-Impressionism, and have sort of made my way through art history. And I'm very, very interested in ancient art, and Roman and Etruscan painting and sculpture. I also, you know, I think that I like artists that, you know, and most artists that we see in the museums did this, but that invented something new and used color to do that, and composition, but mostly color. So I would say that's why that all of that combined would be my answer.
Got it. Thank you, Charity. We have a question from a wonderful painter named Lorraine Stevenson. So I think she's just going to speak. Go ahead, Lorraine.
Thank you, Lillian. I appreciate this because my computer is on a little table. It's really hard for me to type. First, just a quick comment. It's so really thrilling to hear these talks from your gallery, Lillian, and especially today with Charity and Brian, both of whom I feel I sort of know. And just first a comment that the discussion about how figures are used in your paintings was very informative for me. And I noticed after that question was answered that it made me realize that in your case, Charity, to me, the figures seem like they come from something very spontaneous and very secular and very fun. And when I look at Brian's figures, they make me want to look at what that person is really dealing with and struggling with in their life. And I really appreciate that. And I realize that it comes from the spiritual part of your life. And it's very wonderful to see these two artists juxtaposed. But now to cut to the chase, my technical question. When you're painting outside, I know we all get out there and we make mistakes and then we try to recover and recover. And how I would like to just know, when you're painting outside, how much you try to pull the painting back to what's in front of you as opposed to adding and letting the painting take control.
That's a wonderful question, you know, and I do deal with that every time I set up to paint, right? And that's a question I contend. That's a point that I contend with every time. So the one thing I do before I begin painting is I just kind of sit, you know, I sort of take time, and I spend time just looking, really looking at the subject that has already attracted me, that's already sort of you know, lured me there. And when I start seeing something, happen, I'm careful not to try to force something to happen. You know, but when I start to see something happen, I begin to pay attention to what's happening around that could be contributing to that moment. And I sort of follow this thread of, it's not so much a cause and effect. It's more of this integration of many parts acting independently that sort of create this moment, this whether it's like a larger kind of action or gosh, how do I explain this? Or like a happening. It's like a happening of some sort. When that, and it feels like phenomena. It feels like something almost, I mean, it does feel like something is happening. And so when I paint, I'm painting, I'm working to paint into somehow capturing that, not as like not capturing it, but understanding it. I paint to understand it, to see it, and to see it in a different way or a deeper level, to become more empathetic with it, to draw nearer, to come closer to it in a sense. So my decisions that I make as I make the painting are observationally based, and they're informed by what I sort of intuit, what I see happening in that moment.
And Charity, did you have anything that you wanted to add on to Lorraine's question?
I mean, that was a great answer. I think that, like, I'll just say that I love painting outside because I feel like it is constantly moving. I'm just sort of moving things around, and I mean, inevitably there's always that moment where I scrape everything off, but none of that is wasted because you know, it's all relevant no matter what I end up with. So, but it's constantly moving for me outside.
Thank you. That was very affirming. Thank you.
And good to see you.
Thank you, Lorraine. We have another verbal question from Philip. Philip, you can go ahead anytime.
Okay, I'd start by saying I'm just being introduced to Charity's work by seeing this. I'm a longtime fan of Brian's work and have seen a lot of what you've shown today in person. One of the things that interests me about Brian's work is like, if a building gets imploded, it's a building for a really long time, and it's a pile of rubbish for a very long time. But there's a moment in there when it's both a building and a pile of rubbish. And it's as if his paintings are, to me, as if I look away and I look back, it's going to have moved along in time and changed somewhat. So I'd like to hear both of them talk about that element in the paintings. That was
a really neat way of describing that, Philip. Thank you for saying that. You know, it does feel like that, you know, and so okay, so what I was just talking about with Lorraine, and the point that she brought up is that's the starting, like that's sort of how the painting begins. The way that the painting ends is by pulling everything apart, deconstructing, in a sense, everything that I worked so hard in the beginning to construct. And it's so I build, and then I begin to destroy, and then as it's being destroyed, I work to sort of contain the energy that comes from that, so that the picture holds. And so there's a way that I'm working to build up a kind of pressure and energy in the painting, so that it's a kind of like it's a kind of pulsing, sometimes, you know, slow, quiet build up, pulsing, and I try to get it right to the point where it's about to just go, it doesn't. It holds. And that's part of the way that the form and the content work together, and sort of provide the energy of what's happening in that moment in the painting. And I feel like that can't be just a formal consideration. For me, it is formal, but it's also understanding what it is that the painting is really trying to say. And so as I navigate those two aspects, those two realities in the painting, that kind of push and pull, that back and forth, the building and the like the constructing and the deconstructing, all those things begin to sort of like, work together at some point to have that kind of in between. And it's so cool that you like said that, you articulated that. That's like a really neat way of putting it. But yeah, that's what I try to do.
Thank you, Brian. And Charity, do you have anything to add? And if not, I have one more last question for both of you.
Oh, let's go for the last question.
Okay, sounds good. I know we're at noon, so it's been an hour already, but I just want to squeeze in one last question. And there are so many wonderful questions that people have asked, and my apologies that I won't get to all of them. But this one is from Mount Gretna School of Art. How do you, I think this is for both Brian and Charity, how do you think about the space between the figures, the air that is left or removed between the subjects? And we'll end on this question, and either of you can feel free to jump in on this one.
I would say this is something that has always interested me, the space between, because it's such a rich space, especially between figures, but the space between anything is where I feel like all the mystery lies. So that's something I'm constantly working on and involving. It's where I feel like all the invention goes for me, when I'm not working from life. And when I am working from life, it's the part I like looking at the most, actually. That's my answer.
Good answer.
That was great, Charity. It's really great. I'll just add to that. I really like what she said regarding that, and it has a lot to do with like also the way I think about the picture plane and my relationship to it, and how I like to build or construct the space in the painting. And I remember when there was a moment when like if you've had that experience of approaching a corridor of trees, and everything kind of looks very condensed and flat, but then as you begin to move through the trees, it almost looks like what's in front of you begins to pull back, and there's this really strange feeling of expansion that occurs, right? And then all of a sudden, the space, which seemed non-existent but implied because of the overlapping trees, all of a sudden now becomes huge. It becomes vast, and everything opens up, and within those spaces are revealed these like other hidden things, creatures and whatever, little houses tucked away in the woods, and that's the way I kind of think about those sort of interspaces as well. Like the space between the figures is its own form. But like, the space between those figures can function very much like the corridor of trees, where it can appear at first to be almost non-existent, almost like very, very flat, or just like a negative space or something, or ground, right? But then all of a sudden it can take on a role of being figure. It can take on a role of having form, even volumetric, having pressure within it, and beginning to kind of push the other forms out or away or something, and can change the way that a plane is read. Like a ground plane can become all of a sudden like a wall, or and so the functionality of those spaces between forms are very important. And I love what Charity said, because she said like the attention, the invention, like goes into how those spaces are developed.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian. Well, I think we are at the end of our time here. I just wanted to say a couple more words. Horizons will remain on display in our viewing room through July 29th, and we do have a printed catalog available. You can purchase one through our website. And I just want to say thank you one more time to Charity and to Brian and to Gail for your wonderful questions. I thought this was a fantastic conversation.